Are you the owner of a business between about $500,000 in revenue and $3 million in revenue? Whether it's US dollars or pounds, we're talking about the same size of business. It's a really tricky time to be in business. Getting to your first 3 million is pretty tough and can take a long time depending on the industry you're in. And you're scaling the business, you're transitioning. That first million is really that lifestyle business where everything's dependent on the owners of the business. They're at the center of everything. They're like the ringmaster of a circus. And then scaling beyond 1 million is when you start to create some management layer in your employees, and you can start to have the opportunity to build some real business value in something that's sellable. Bradley Hamner has built the BlueprintOS system that provides you with all of the tools, all of the skills to transition you through this tricky time in your business journey. Have a listen to this episode. Bradley shares some of these tips and he provides us with some links of how we can learn more. Welcome to the podcast that's dedicated to helping business owners to prepare for exit so you can maximize value and then exit on your terms. This is the Exit Insights podcast presented by Succession Plus. I'm Daryl Bates Brownsword, and today I've got Bradley Hamner joining me. And Bradley, I normally do a little bit of an intro, but I think in this case, given the alignment of what we do and the way we fit together, I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself and just position yourself and your background, and then we can jump into talking about how we can help businesses in the $500,000 to $3 million revenue-ish bracket make sure that they're ready for exit and the business is ready for exit at the same time the owners are.
Awesome. Well, Daryl, it's a pleasure to be on your podcast. Thanks for the opportunity. And I'm looking forward to sharing some things that are hopefully helpful, really tangible that your listeners can take away. So I'm founder and CEO of BlueprintOS, and it's one of the companies that I have in my holdco, which is currently a $10 million holdco that we're building to $30 million by 2030. Well, that sounds great, but going back when I first started my initial business in the insurance industry, had no background in insurance. It was just a business opportunity. My dad's a small business owner in agriculture, and I really had two skills. I knew how to sell, talk to people, and I really knew how to work hard, which I picked up from my dad and his background in farming and agriculture. And a lot of things are caught, they're just simply not taught. Well, that worked in that business up until the point that it simply did not. I ran out of time. I burned out. The business began to plateau. And I almost said, you know what? I've got to go and leave this. I can't do this anymore. This is not good for my health. I had kind of a health scare. Fortunately, I found myself in Toronto and someone had shared with me, it's just systems and processes. I rolled my eyes, said I've been told that for years, but ultimately I started to put it together, and that ultimately changed the business, and that changed my life. And that's some of the things that we share with our members and clients today.
Beautiful. So you've run your own business, and you've exited that. So you've been there, done that. You've earned the t-shirt, the sweatshirt, the hoodie. You've earned your stripes by being there, and now you're focusing on doing it with others. And you've developed your own methodology called BlueprintOS, which I'm dead keen to dig into, to help business owners prepare their business so that they don't fall in or repeat the journey that you went in. Is that right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And so obviously we didn't have any of this. I didn't have any of the language back then, but I really saw myself, I was the rainmaker of the business. Everything ran through me, not just the sales, but everything was simply dependent upon me. I come from Huntsville, Alabama, and so here's the U.S. Space and Rocket Center. And I don't know a lot about space, but we do know that small things rotate around big things. And so my business rotated around me in the early days. Well, what happened? The business got bigger. Like it was actually working. And then it started to sling me around and something simply needed to change. But honestly, I didn't know what that thing needed to be. And so the journey that I first went on, and we can get into this later, the two journeys, I first had to transition and see myself as not the rainmaker to where everything is dependent upon me. It was just an owner dependent business, or sometimes I will say a personality driven business. I needed to transition and become the architect of the business, and what architects use, whether they use blueprints. And so what I ended up putting together unknowingly was a Blueprint operating system. I had heard for years the importance of having systems and processes, but it was like the Wizard of Oz. Nobody would share with me what that actually looked like. How do you actually
Yeah.
do that? I would stare at a blank Word document and say, I don't even know where to begin. I don't know how to structure this. I don't know where to put this. And so you had disorganization and simply operational inefficiency. It wasn't running like a well-oiled machine. It was running much more like a hand crank with me. As long as I was in the business, cranking the business, it would move forward. Well, eventually that gets exhausting. And that's exactly what happened.
Yeah. I've worked in coaching before. I was specializing in exit planning. I was worked in as myself as a management coach and a growth coach. And I worked with a lot of business owners who replayed that same story to me. And they said, look, Daryl, I'm working in the business. I'm doing what I know how to do. I'm really busy. I'm really productive. If I stop, the business or revenue stops. So I've got to keep going. The business relies on me to make decisions. The business relies on me to make sales. I've got to be here the whole time and keep things moving. Now, I know that I've got to work. That means I'm working in the business. So the Gerber's famous sayings are worldwide. And I know I've got to start working on the business, but I don't know where to start. And if I knew where to start, I'd already be doing it. And so I'm a little bit lost when I try and sit down on a Friday morning and I've set some time aside to work on the business, but I just feel a bit lost. And I know there's all this other work piling up behind me. So I just get into doing that again. And I know I can be really productive. I'm really busy and I'm getting stuff done and I'm making money. But it's just a repeat cycle, and then I'm picking up all the things that have fallen through the cracks, and I'm forever fighting fires. So it means I'm working 60, 80, 90 hours a week, feeling stressed, feeling frustrated, feeling exhausted. How do I get out of that cycle? So it
Yeah.
sounds like the Blueprint OS is an answer to that question. And who's it aimed for, this Blueprint OS? Is it for certain business sizes, Bradley?
We really know the world of $500,000 in revenue. So we don't work with brand new startups, but if you can get to 500,000, you have probably at least 2 team members, maybe a couple fractional team
Yeah.
members, a VA and EA, something like that. Like you've gotten some initial traction in the business. Okay. And then really up to about 3 million. Now we of course have people in terms of a bell curve over 3 million have been with us. One of my clients was at 400,000 when we started, and now they're over 4 million in revenue. So we have obviously some, but the vast majority really sit in that $500,000 to $1 million or $3 million range, somewhere between 2 and 20 team members. And I will tell you, that space, even the 10 to 20 space, is really difficult because you're in this like place where you're too small to be big, too big to be small. Like it's just a little kind of like a no man's land, so to speak.
Yep.
I've heard Daniel Priestley say it's kind of like the wilderness, so to speak, of like,
Yep.
how do you actually do this? And so we know that space really, really well, is that the business is still highly dependent upon you, at least initially. Okay. The team members know you. They came to work for you specifically. You've got
Yeah.
maybe your first level of management in place, but not executive leaders, not highly paid C-suite executives. So we just really know that space incredibly, incredibly well. And it's important to note, given that all of our clients and members are bootstrapped, right? They're not taking
Yeah.
in outside investment. One of my best friends is in that space, and he knows that space really, really well. And the reason I say that is because one of the areas that we really talk about is the concept, which we can get into later, and how do we balance revenue growth, year-over-year revenue growth, and profitability. And if you're bootstrapped, you have to balance both of those type of things. Okay.
Yep.
Not easy. Whereas if you're taking in outside investment, it's growth at all cost. It doesn't really matter about the profitability because you can go back to the well and get more money. But in our world, that's just not possible.
Yeah. And at that size as well, something to be aware of as you are, is that any cost feels scary. because of the incremental size and taking on your first employee, and that and you've done that by the time you're at 500,000, but taking on that first employee, it's a massive decision when it's just you. And if you're only two people, or I think you mentioned 2 to 20 sort of range of people, you really are in that no man's land. Because if you've got management team in place, as you say, they're not high level management, they're operational managers. So there's often a big gap in skills between the owners, the founders, and the management team. And that's part of the business of that size, because the owners are very much control freaks in businesses of those size. And because of that, the business revolves around them and very dependent on them. But to get from that, let's call it that 5, 8, 10 person business to the 20 person business, and you're spanning either side of that, that's a real inflection point of, as you say, scaling or growing through no man's land. Once they get to 3 mil, they've got a lot of foundations in place. They've got a management team in place, or some sort of leadership team. They may not be highly experienced, but it could be first-time managers. But they've got people in full-time management roles, probably not working to their capacity because there's in a full-time management position because there's only 20 people, which means the business can keep scaling without investing too much more in resources, up to maybe 4 or 5 mil.
You've nailed it. You've nailed it right there, because when you're at 3 mil, if you're at a 20% profitability, just an average, I'm just using that number as an average, you've got $600,000 in profitability. You're probably paying yourself, at least in the US, some sort of a salary along with that. So you're pretty set, like you're doing pretty well. Okay. So now you have the resources, the literal cash and profit to then make some of these much more higher leverage hires, and these hires bring in expertise. Like if you listen to, let's just say an Alex Hormozy as an example, which I love a lot of his content, not all of it, but a lot of it. And he'll talk about the arbitrage of bringing in, very highly paid people. Yeah, if you have the resources to do that. But if you're at $1 million, you're not hiring $250,000 CMO. You're just not
even
doing
paying
it.
yourself that.
You're not even paying yourself that. And so you hear these ideas, and then I was like, I don't know how to do that. And so I'm wearing a hat, for those listening, like you're wearing all these different hats in the business, and that's really challenging. And so it's that part of it where we really help people to, okay, well, how do you do, what do you need to do to be able to get there? So then if your desire, like we have a few clients, their desire is to get to 8 figures. Okay. That's what they want to do. They really now want to get to $10 million. Okay. But we've got to get to 3 before you get to 10. As an example.
From 1 or 0 to 3, I reckon, is much harder than getting from 3 to 10.
I honestly do believe that 100%. I really do believe that because of what I said. You can actually now go hire 6-figure, really talented people who come into the business already preloaded with batteries and knowledge and experience. Whereas the other side, you're hiring people that don't have that level of experience, and you are the one teaching them how to do all the things. This is how we market. This is how we sell. If you're a $10 million company, you just go hire the best sales manager and you say, listen, this is our sales department. You have experience building and developing a sales team. We want to go from 10 sales reps to 20 sales reps. You've done this 3 times. Boom, let's go do it. That's a totally different world than the majority of our, pretty much all of our members live in.
So let's jump into the Blueprint OS, shall we, Bradley? Because that's what we want to unpack. We're a business owner that's sort of $500,000 in the 3 mil bracket. They're bootstrapping it. They're balancing profit and cash flow all the time and making sure that they're driving forward. They've got some employees. They're probably an owner business that's a business that's very owner centric. The business owner has grafted and worked really hard to get to where they are by being involved in all the decisions, by being involved in every aspect of their business. And when there's a business of less than 10 people, not only is that required, it's achievable, because the business owner can have direct one-to-one relationships with everyone in the business when there's only 10 other people in there. Once you get up to 15, 20 people, it's a bit harder to have those direct management relationships and manage that many people. So what I'd really love to see is what is the approach? What is the framework of the Blueprint OS? And then if it doesn't address it, I'm going to give you a question on notice, if you like, is I'd love to know how you eliminate owner dependence in those businesses as they're going through that transition point.
Okay, fantastic. So our model, first of all, before I get into it, and it's our 5 principles that I'm going to relay, is that this idea of having a blueprint operating system is not a concept, it is a thing. It is not a concept, it is a thing. It is something you can point to and you can say, this is our operating system. A lot of our members will use OS. This is my OS in the business. This is what the business is running on. And what the business is running on is structurally 5 principles. So it doesn't matter if you're using SharePoint, Google Drive, Dropbox, it doesn't matter, Notion even. You can point to, and the way we teach our members is to structure their business using these 5 principles. And those are, number 1, you have to lead yourself first. Number 2, clarity. Number 3, alignment. Number 4, team. And number 5, execution. And so as you can imagine, I said there are 2 journeys. There's the journey that the entrepreneur is on, and that is all about leading themselves first. If they lead themselves first, they can transition from being the rainmaker to the architect. They can lead themselves first. They can transition and see themselves from being the rainmaker to becoming the architect. And there are some actual tools that we do to actually help people to specifically do that. And then the other 4, clarity, alignment, team, and execution, is literally what the business is running on. So lead yourself first, clarity, alignment, team, and execution. And I'll go one level deeper. Each one of the principles has 3 playbooks. You see, in my own journey, when I started to put all this together, I do some quick Google searches and I'm confused as all get out. I don't know what's the difference of a playbook. I don't know what's a system. I don't know what's a process. And the more I Google, the more I research, the more confused I got. So I said, I have to make sense of this.
Okay? You're not the only one. That's okay.
I'm just using words interchangeably. We teach our members not to do that. Like, this specifically means this. Okay.
Every business benefits from a common language. And in my experience, that helps align. And I guess that's where you're heading to with alignment.
100%. Yeah. So each principle has 3 playbooks. And so effectively the entire business runs off 15 playbooks. And that's what we teach. That's what we teach. And we obviously give them access to our playbooks. But I want to go to your last part, which was, okay, well, how do we start to begin to eliminate owner dependency? What is it? Well, it doesn't happen overnight, number 1, but you do have to start getting your business out of your head. And so we teach all the way down to the granular, even how to structure your documents so that there's commonality with how things look and feel within the organization. And some people say, well, that's ridiculous. What does it matter that the documents all look the same? You're right. It doesn't matter to a client. It doesn't matter to your customers that all of your back-end documents look the same. But you know what it does do, Daryl? It starts to embed a culture that we do things by design, not by default. We are intentional in the way that we do things, and that permeates the entire organization. And so then everybody starts to operate like a well-oiled machine.
Yeah. So if you start that discipline of design and being deliberate and doing everything consciously, that creates, I guess, a structure and expectation and familiarity, even, as people can be trained, and you can go, right, I need you to do this. And they'll go, well, I've never done this before. But because everything is designed a certain way, they'll know where to go to get education or instruction, or who to ask will know where to go to get some instruction. some documentation. I'm stuck now to call it a procedure, a process, or whatever. And it speeds things up because it prevents rework and it keeps things efficient. Is that your driver behind it?
Yeah, it really is about creating operational excellence. It
Yeah.
really is about operational excellence, if I simply put it that way. Okay. And that's why we intentionally use the language well-oiled machine. Look, I dealt with levels of inconsistent processes. I'll give you a very specific example in my journey. So I hired my very first EA in 2015, I believe, late 2015. And so she comes in and we start to create this process basically of me meeting with clients. Okay. And guess what? It started to work and it started to improve. And next time we'd have somebody, I'd say, hey, next time I meet with Daryl, will you print this off and let me, do this? And then whenever they leave, we'll do this. And so it got it better over time. 11 months later, this thing is going pretty well. And then she turns in a resignation. And I remember the moment she walked out the door and I thought to myself, well, this sucks. I just spent a year training her and all of that knowledge walked out the door. That felt like a waste of time.
You hadn't
and so the
documented
initial, I didn't document any of that.
Right.
I hadn't documented any of that. So now all that knowledge, I still have it, but now the next person I have to come in, I have to
download it,
start it all over. Whereas if I was documenting it along the way, like if she and I were documenting along the way, now the next person, let's say she still leaves, they move, whatever the case may be. The next person comes in and says, okay, this is the document. This is how we actually run these appointments. This is how we do this sort of thing. And so that's just a very specific example that a lot of our business owners in our space deal with. And so then, last comment on that is my initial thought was EAs don't work. EAs don't work. That was the wrong lesson for me to learn in that moment. Now, of course, I've come very full circle on that one, but in the moment I thought, that was the wrong lesson for me to learn. It was actually my fault because I had not actually put in a system of thinking. How do we actually document this?
Yeah. The thing I try and work with our clients on is if you're going to do anything more than once, document it.
100%.
So you worked with your EA, you learned that, well, hang on a sec, just getting and working with someone and spreading the intelligence, if you like, or the process over two people doesn't work because one can always leave and then it comes back to you and you're starting from scratch. Now, is that when you learn to go, I've got to document this? Is that the learning that eventually came out of that?
Yeah, 100%, right? 100%. So,
and there are so many tools that make it easy nowadays compared to 15 years ago.
Oh, so many tools now. Even back then, there was not the tools. I mean, I still remember staring at a blank screen. So one thing I want to share with people is before you even start the process, we actually teach this. We call it Rembrandts in the attic. Is that before you ever need to start worrying about creating new documentation. So somebody listening to this is saying, I've heard this before too, that I need to start documenting. I'm going to share with you that I actually believe you already have Rembrandts in the attic. There's been some stories about quite literal Rembrandts found in Scottish attics worth $60 million. And so on your desktop right now as a business owner, in your drive, there are incredible assets that you've already created. What matters first, before you go and learn how to create any new documents, you first need to have an organizing function of how to organize those things. I don't know if you're familiar with the book, The Magic Art of Tidying Up. It's actually a Netflix show now. I think it's Marie Kondo. Okay. And what she teaches, she goes into homes and cleans the homes. And so her methodology, Daryl, is she goes into a bedroom, into a master closet, takes everything out, and then one by one says, does this give you joy? And she puts it back. Okay, let's take that concept and apply it to your business.
Absolutely.
You go in and you look at these documents and you say, do we use this anymore? We don't. Let's put it in an archive folder. And we just put it in an archive folder. You don't have to delete it. Just put it in an archive. And then the rest of them, you start to actually organize by the 5 principles. And now the business starts to have some structure to it. And it has some organization to it. People know where to find things. We're not sending people on a scavenger hunt all the time. They know where to begin to find things. That starts the process of actually having the business to begin to build and run on an operating system.
Okay. So step one or principle one is you've got to lead yourself first.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. So is that, have you got some sort of measure that you can go, right, I know this person is leading themselves first now. Have you got a checklist or something that you use to go, yep, that box is ticked?
Yeah. In fact, I would love to share with you, we actually have an award called the Rainmaker to Architect Award, and it has 5 criteria. You have 5 criteria from going from being the rainmaker to the architect. So it's a nice concept, but we actually wanted to pull it down into something that is very tangible. And I'd love to give you the 5 criteria. Criteria number 1 is that your business is doing over $1 million in annual revenue. Now, a lot of people, they can check that box. They can say, hey, we're already there.
Yep.
Some of our members can't, right? All right. Number 2, rule of 40. Is your year-over-year growth and your profitability over 40? So are you at 20% growth and 20% profitability? And if you've done that, your rule of 40 number, you can check that box. So what that does is it forces you to say, not only are we doing over $1 million, but we're also profitable and growing. So we're over $1 million, we're profitable and we're growing. So that's the first 2. Number 3, you may achieve that, Daryl. You may be profitable. You may be growing, but if you don't take any time off and you're burnout and you've worked 2,500 hours in a year, what good is it? So we actually say you need to take 12 weeks off. And initially when people say that, they go, oh my gosh, 12 weeks? Well, we actually share with our members that that's actually very doable whenever you look at it a certain way. And so that's number 3. Have you taken 12 weeks off in a year? We want our members to build the success of their business based off 40 weeks in a year. 40 weeks in a year is how we build it. Number 4, do you have an EA in place? Having an EA is not a luxury, it's a necessity for a small business owner. And then lastly, number 5, show me, don't tell me. Show me your 15 playbooks. And so if you've done that and you have been able to check all 5 of those boxes, and we literally give you an award with medallions on them that have the 5, you now can say, I have become the architect of my business.
Brilliant. Okay, so there's lead yourself first. So similarly, I guess you've got criteria for clarity on what clarity is all about, and then what alignment's all about, and then team and execution. I think a lot of these words can be self-explanatory, but we've got a little bit of time, so can you give us a heads up on just each of those the rest of those the rest of the 5 principles?
Yeah, let's go into let's go into team. I think this is an easy one for people to know what team is. Team is how do you attract, develop, and retain A players in the business. How do you attract? How do you develop? And how do you retain A players in the business? And so in those different playbooks, you get things like, how do you put together a really great job description template? How do you onboard brand new team members the first 90 days effectively? How do you continuously develop them and create a world-class training system that develops your team ongoing? How do you create a growth track or a career progression to where they're going to want to stay with you as you continue to grow? Those are specific things that we teach in those playbooks. And then I'll drop down into execution. You actually mentioned this before we hit record. But in execution, there is marketing, there's sales, and there's cash. So there's the marketing playbook, the sales playbook, and the cash playbook. So marketing, how do you lead gen, lead nurture, your messaging and positioning? Sales, How do you acquire new customers? How do you get them to pay more? And then, of course, cash. We encourage people to consider the profit first methodology for all the reasons we've mentioned earlier. Mike Michalowicz has come on my podcast several times, so he's excellent. So we encourage people to consider that methodology. And then what are just some other cash principles that are in place and things that you should do on a regular basis of managing the cash in the business? I didn't know those things whenever I first got started. I didn't know how to read financial statements. And so some of the things we do is actually share with people, like, this is what an income statement is. This is what a balance sheet is. This is what a cash flow statement is. This is why you should know these things. And so, for some people that are have been in business for a longer time, they may find that to be really basic information. But we also are trying to hit different levels, right? We have some people that just never been taught this stuff. Like, nobody has ever shared them these things. And then we have other people, like we have actually literally one member is a former CPA, and so like he's very well educated, obviously even more than I am about that topic. So that's team, attract, develop, and retain, and then execution is marketing, sales, and cash.
So that's great detail, and thanks for explaining that. What's going through my head now, Bradley, is that what you've done is that you've broken down everything that needs to happen in a business to help it grow successfully and sustainably through that transition period that really is the transition period from being a self-employed business through to actually a viable business that's starting to have some valuation to it. And to me, that's once you start employing a leadership team, you've got some leaders in place. So you're helping a business scale through that zone, and you've documented at the right level of detail, by the sounds of it, for that level of business, all the tips and tricks that they need to be doing and everything they need to be looking at to keep their business on track and grow through that and maintain control at the same time. And you've got the blueprint for a business to be successful at that size.
You're so right. And given what you do, Daryl, and how you help people, that sure, micro businesses get sold, but really you've got to be probably at that 3 million revenue, throwing off, ideally if you're throwing off $1 million in profit. Now you begin to cross the threshold to where you're actually attractive to an acquirer to look at. And so if you exit at 3.5 times the average multiple, at $1 million, you can start looking at EBITDA at that point. So now you're looking at a $3 million multiple. But I think at the same time, there's two things here, is that at the end of the day, an acquirer, regardless if it's PE, strategic, or even a financial buyer, they're going to want to look at a few things. They're going to want to look at, obviously, the hard numbers, the numbers that you obviously would know really well, even better than I would, on some of those things, but also the owner dependency. If that business is highly dependent upon the owner or founders of that business, they're going to devalue that business many, many, many multiples, because it's just not as valuable. Because if they pull that owner or those founders out of the business, what are they going to have? They could have a huge decrease in the number of clients that are on board, et cetera. And so by doing this and taking the time to document it and extracting yourself, number one, I think personally, you get the freedom and flexibility that you probably started your business to want to have to begin with. And then secondly, now that's the same thing that an acquirer is going to look at and say, you know what, we can actually take over this business because it is not fully dependent upon this founder. And that becomes very valuable.
Yeah. And the thing to remind business owners of is that when buyers are looking at your business, they're just assessing risk. They're assessing what is the risk of those revenue patterns that you've built up continuing once you sell the business. And if it's dependent on you as the owner, or if it's dependent on anything else in the business, any other key people, if the systems aren't documented, if there's no blueprint for the business, then they're just going to go, that's a risk. I'll either move on to the next opportunity, or I'm going to mark the valuation down a whole lot if I like the product or if I like the opportunity and there's a cultural alignment. But just because they like you and they're culturally aligned, they're not going to throw a bucket load of cash at you just because they like you. they still are assessing their risk and they want to eliminate that owner dependence. So
You're so right.
Bradley, what's going through my head is there's so much detail here, and we could talk for probably half a day and still not cover it all. If listeners want to learn a bit more about this Blueprint OS, how do they find out more about that?
Yeah, thank you. So we have a lot of the things I shared. We actually have a step-by-step course people can get access to if they go to blueprintos.com/assets. A number of the assets that we actually use with our members and then I use personally are there on that page. So just go to blueprintos.com/assets and they can get access to a lot of those different things. And we walk them through exactly actually how to employ that and how to get started in the business.
So that'll really help them if they've gone, hey, look, those 5 principles sound really interesting, and yeah, I've got to lead myself first. If I'm looking for some tips on how to do that, your tips on clarity, alignment, team, and execution, BlueprintOS.com/assets, and there's some downloads there that they can tap into. Bradley,
Absolutely.
That's brilliant. Look, I know we've covered some ground, but and those 5 key principles, but if there's one message, if there's one highlight, if you like, the point that you're really hoping to make, what is the key message that you would love listeners to take away from our conversation today?
It's one I actually haven't shared, and it's ideas are everywhere, implementation is everything. My business and my life did not change until I actually started to do the things I had heard about for years. And it took a health scare for me to finally get my act together and start doing this thing. And I hope that someone doesn't have to go through some sort of that life event to get them into action. I had heard these things, listened to them in Audible books, podcasts, read it in books, been to conferences, etc. But finally, when I started to take some of these ideas and say, you know what, it's not the ideas. It's not the ideas. It's the actual doing of the thing. That's when things began to change. And so I just leave with people one of our maxims, which is ideas are everywhere, but implementation is really everything.
You got to execute. Ideas are great, but if you don't implement them, they're useless.
That's right.
So let's run with it. Bradley, thanks for sharing your exit insights with us today. It's been enlightening.
Daryl, thank you so much. I appreciate it. You're a pro.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Exit Insights podcast. If you haven't already, now's a good time to subscribe and get notified of all future episodes. Now, if you're planning to exit and sell your business one day, you want to be sure that it's exit ready, when you're ready to exit and with the numbers that work for you. Now, this is going to need some planning. Now, the Business Sellability Scorecard is a good place to start. Just answer a few short questions about your goals and your aspirations for your business and your succession, and you'll get a report and a score for you, your business, and your numbers. As many of our guests have already said, don't wait until it's too late. Don't wait until you're ready to sell. Start your exit planning now to make sure that you're one of the 20% of business owners who successfully exit their business.